A rainy evening, a borrowed umbrella, and a tired father. The rain poured relentlessly, turning the city streets into rivers of silver under flickering streetlights. Eliza clutched her small umbrella tighter as she weaved her way through the crowd, her shoes already soaked, and her tote bag damp from stray droplets. It had been a long day at the tiny art supply store where she worked part-time. All she wanted was to get home, change into dry clothes, and forget about the stack of hospital bills waiting on her kitchen table. As she approached the corner near the subway entrance, she slowed. There, standing under a narrow awning, was a man with a little girl in his arms. He held no umbrella. His suit jacket was drenched, clinging to his broad shoulders. The little girl, no more than 5, rested her head against his chest, her braids dripping water down his sleeve. Eliza hesitated. Something about the sight tugged at her heart. The man shifted his weight, adjusting the girl in his arms as she whimpered softly in her sleep. His free hand tried and failed to shield her from the rain. The next moment, a bus roared past, spraying the curb with dirty water that splashed against his trouser legs. He flinched, but didn't step back. "Excuse me," Eliza called out before her nerves could stop her. The man looked up. His eyes, tired, cautious, met hers. "You're soaked," she said, holding out her umbrella. "Take this. You'll both catch a cold." He blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "I thank you, but—" "No buts," Eliza insisted. "I'm almost home. It's just 2 blocks. The man hesitated. "You'll get wet." Eliza offered a small smile, rainwater dripping from her bangs. "I'll survive." For a second, it seemed like he might refuse again, but then he shifted the little girl and reached for the umbrella. Their fingers brushed briefly, and he murmured, "Thank you, really." Eliza nodded and stepped back into the rain. It was colder than she expected without her umbrella, but she ignored it. Itsy. As she walked away, she glanced back once. The man was adjusting the umbrella over the sleeping girl, his expression softened with relief. She didn't know his name, or why he'd been standing alone in the rain, but for reasons she couldn't explain, she hoped he and the little girl made it home safe. What Eliza didn't see, couldn't have seen, was how the man's gaze followed her retreating figure for a long moment before he whispered under his breath, "I won't forget this." Neither of them knew then that this small act of kindness would become the first thread in a tapestry that would change both their lives forever. The mysterious stranger in the coffee shop, the bell above the cafe door, jingled as Eliza wiped down the counter, her mind still lost in thoughts of hospital invoices and overdue rent. It was early morning, and the air smelled of roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement. Outside, the streets glistened, reflecting the muted sunlight trying to break through the clouds. She didn't hear the door at first, too focused on aligning the sugar jars. "Excuse me," a deep voice said gently. Eliza looked up, startled, and almost dropped the glass jar in her hand. Standing there, drier and sharper than the night before, was the man from the rain. He looked different in the daylight. His hair was neatly combed, his tailored coat hung perfectly, and the exhaustion that shadowed his face last night seemed softened somehow. But it was the eyes that gave him away, calm yet piercing, the same ones that had met hers under the flickering streetlight. "You." The words slipped out before Eliza could stop herself. He smiled faintly. "Me?" For a moment neither spoke. He took a tentative step closer. "You left before I could return your umbrella. I wanted to thank you properly." "Oh." Eliza blinked, fumbling for words. "It's fine, I didn't mind." He placed the folded umbrella on the counter between them. It was spotless, carefully dried, as though he had taken great care of it. "I'm Nathan," he said finally, extending a hand. "Eliza," she replied softly, shaking it. His palm was warm, steady. There was a pause, filled only by the hiss of the espresso machine in the background. "That little girl," Eliza began hesitantly. "She's your daughter?" He nodded. "Sophie. She was exhausted after her first day at a new school. I didn't want to wake her, so I carried her all the way." Eliza smiled faintly. "She's lucky to have you." Nathan's gaze softened. "I'm the lucky one." Before she could respond, a coworker popped out from the back room. "Eliza, can you grab Table 7's order?" "Yes, just a sec." she said quickly, stepping away to prepare the tray. When she returned, Nathan was still there, hands in his coat pockets, as if debating whether to say more. "Would it be strange if I asked for your favorite coffee recommendation?" he asked finally, a small curve tugging at his lips. "Not strange at all," she said with a quiet laugh. "You seem like a black coffee kind of guy. No sugar?" "You're not far off," he replied. As she prepared his drink, Eliza felt an odd warmth settle in her chest. She didn't know why her heart beat faster every time she glanced at him. It was silly. He was just a customer, a stranger she had helped once in the rain, or so she thought. When she handed him the steaming cup, their fingers brushed again, and Nathan met her eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for the coffee." And for a brief moment, Eliza wondered if her small act of kindness had started something bigger than she could have imagined. Two worlds collide. 2 days later, Eliza smoothed the creases in her second-hand blazer, taking a deep breath as she stepped out of the elevator. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, and the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and copier ink. This wasn't her usual world. She had been called in last minute to help her best friend Claire, who worked at a boutique design firm downtown. Their small team had been invited to pitch ideas for a branding campaign to a large corporation, a chance that could make or break their struggling little company. "You're just here to take notes and help me organize samples," Claire had whispered as they rode the subway together that morning. "You'll be fine." But now, standing outside the sleek glass conference room, Eliza felt her palms grow clammy. Through the transparent walls, she saw men and women in tailored suits arranging documents and adjusting presentation slides. The air practically crackled with professionalism. She followed Claire in quietly, clutching the portfolio case tightly against her chest. "Good morning," a deep voice greeted from across the room. Eliza froze. At the head of the table, dressed immaculately in a charcoal suit, sat Nathan. Now. He was scanning a stack of papers, one hand resting thoughtfully against his chin. Sophie's father. The man she had handed her umbrella to. The man who had walked into her cafe just days ago. Five-therapy. Her stomach flipped. Fiven. Nathan looked up, and his sharp gaze softened instantly as it landed on her. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something else. Something warmer. "Eliza?" he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. Claire turned to her, puzzled. "You two know each other?" Eliza felt heat rush to her cheeks. We've met briefly." Nathan stood, buttoning his jacket. "Miss Bennett and I crossed paths recently. She was kind to my daughter and me." The room fell silent for a heartbeat before Claire cleared her throat nervously and began setting up the presentation. Throughout the meeting, Eliza tried to keep her eyes on her notebook, but she could feel Nathan's gaze drifting her way more than once. Each time, her pulse quickened. When the presentation ended and the team filed out, Nathan remained seated, fingers steepled. "Eliza, may I have a moment?" he asked softly as Claire exchanged a surprised glance with her. Eliza hesitated before nodding. When the door clicked shut, Nathan spoke. "You work here?" he asked gently. "Just helping out today," she admitted. "This isn't really my world." Nathan's lips curved slightly. "I'm not sure about that. You seemed perfectly at ease offering your umbrella to a drenched stranger." Eliza laughed nervously, clutching her bag tighter. "That's different. That was just kindness," Nathan interrupted. "Something this world could use more of." For a moment, the room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Nathan took a small step closer. "I don't know why, but I keep thinking about that night. And about you." Eliza's breath caught. "Perhaps," Nathan continued softly, "we were meant to meet again." Eliza looked up at him, unsure what to say. She didn't know it yet, but this second meeting would become the next thread in a tapestry neither of them expected to weave, an anonymous kindness that changed everything. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fading lilies. Eliza sat by her mother's bedside, her hands gripping a thin wad of cash in her purse. It wasn't enough, not even close. "I told you not to worry about me," her mother murmured, her voice weak but warm. "You should be focusing on your own life, Eliza." "I am," Eliza said quickly, forcing a smile. "And this is part of it. You're my life too, Mom." But as she stepped out into the dimly lit hallway moments later, her smile faltered. The truth pressed heavily on her chest. The new treatment had pushed their bills past breaking point. Her contract job at the design firm was ending in a week, and the cafe hours barely paid rent. She didn't know what to do. That evening, as the rain fell again in quiet sheets against her apartment window, Eliza pulled out her phone and opened her banking app, staring at the dwindling numbers. Then, with a sigh, she set her phone down and leaned back against the creaky couch. Across town, in a sleek office lined with glass and steel, Nathan stared at his computer screen. On it was an invoice from the hospital. He'd asked his assistant to pull the information discreetly after overhearing Eliza on the phone earlier that day. "She's trying to pay it all herself," his assistant had whispered. "Refused every offer of help from friends." Now Nathan hesitated with his cursor hovering over the confirm payment button. He didn't want to embarrass her, didn't want her to feel like charity. But he couldn't stand the thought of her carrying this weight alone. With a quiet breath, he clicked. Transaction complete. 2 days later, Eliza returned to the hospital during her lunch break, clutching every dollar she'd scraped together. "I'd like to make a payment for Margaret Bennett," she said to the clerk. The woman behind the desk tapped her keyboard, then looked up. Her account was settled this week. Eliza blinked. "What? By who?" "Anonymous donor," the clerk replied gently. "Sorry, we can't share details." Eliza stood frozen for a long moment, her heart pounding. The next morning, as she entered the cafe, she found a small paper bag sitting neatly on the counter. Inside was a freshly baked scone, still warm, and a folded note written in careful handwriting. "You deserve to start your day with something warm." There was no name. Eliza looked around the room, but no one seemed to notice her pause. Slowly, a small smile tugged at her lips. She didn't know why, but in her heart, she felt certain she knew who had left it. And for the first time in weeks, the crushing weight on her chest lifted just slightly. What she didn't know was that across the street, inside a parked black car, Nathan sat quietly, watching her silhouette through the cafe window. He whispered under his breath, "You deserve the world, Eliza, even if you never know it came from me." A father, a daughter, and the woman who cared. The autumn sun filtered through the tall cafe windows, casting a golden glow across the small tables. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron and looked up just in time to see the door swing open. It was Sophie. The little girl bounded in with all the enthusiasm of a child released from school. Her braids bounced as she clutched a small stuffed rabbit, and her bright eyes lit up when she spotted Eliza. "You're here!" Sophie exclaimed, rushing forward before Eliza could react. Eliza knelt instinctively, catching the girl in a gentle hug. "And you're wide awake this time," Sophie giggled. "I wasn't asleep last time. I was just resting my eyes." Behind her, Nathan entered, holding a small box of pastries. He looked different today, more relaxed in a navy sweater and dark jeans instead of his usual business suit. But his eyes, those calm, observant eyes, were the same. "Sorry to drop in unannounced," he said with a faint smile. "She insisted we come here after school." Eliza straightened, brushing an errant strand of hair behind her ear. "You're both always welcome." Sophie tugged on Eliza's hand. "Can we sit with you?" "Daddy said he has work calls later, but I want to stay here." Eliza hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, let me just grab my bag." They settled into a quiet corner, Sophie happily nibbling on a cookie while chattering about her new school. Nathan listened with patient amusement, occasionally offering gentle corrections when Sophie exaggerated her tales. Eliza watched them both, unable to ignore the warmth that spread in her chest. She had seen many fathers over the years, distant, distracted, too busy, but Nathan was different. There was a steady kindness in the way he smoothed Sophie's braids or leaned close to listen to her excited whispers. "You're very good with her," Eliza said softly when Sophie darted off to look at the pastry display. Nathan glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I'm trying." Being her only parent, it's terrifying sometimes. "You're doing better than you think," Eliza replied gently. "Sophie adores you. Anyone can see that." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. The cafe noises faded into the background, leaving only the quiet hum of connection between them. When Sophie returned, she climbed onto the bench beside Eliza, holding out her half-eaten cookie. "You can have the last bite," she said solemnly. Eliza smiled, touched by the small gesture. "Thank you, Sophie. That's very kind." Nathan watched them, his heart tightening in a way he hadn't felt in years. He had built walls around himself after losing Sophie's mother, walls he thought would never come down. But watching Eliza laugh softly as Sophie leaned against her shoulder, he felt the first cracks begin to form. Later, as they prepared to leave, Sophie hugged Eliza again. "Will you come to the park with us sometime?" Eliza looked at Nathan. He nodded slightly, a question in his eyes. "I'd love to," Eliza said finally, her voice warm. And though none of them knew it yet, this quiet afternoon would become the first of many memories they would build together, not as strangers, but as something closer. The confrontation and the stand for justice. The office air was tense, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Eliza stacked folders on her desk carefully, her hands trembling slightly. This was supposed to be her last week at the design firm. Her contract was ending, and there was no promise of renewal. She had planned to leave quietly, without fuss. But then it happened. "Do you even know how to do your job?" Mr. Cartwright's voice boomed across the room. The department head loomed over a junior designer, his face flushed with anger. "You've embarrassed the entire team in front of a client." The young woman shrank in her seat, clutching a crumpled report in her hands. I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence," he barked. Eliza froze. Around her, no one moved. No one spoke. "Enough." She rose slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mr. Cartwright," she said, her voice calm but firm. His head snapped toward her. "What?" "That's not how you speak to a colleague," Eliza continued, stepping forward. "Everyone makes mistakes, but humiliating her in front of the entire office? That's not leadership. That's bullying." Gasps rippled through the room. Cartwright's face darkened. "Excuse me? You're a temp. Do you think you're in any position to lecture me?" "I think I'm in a position to say what's right," Eliza replied, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Pack your things, Miss Bennett," Cartwright spat. "You're done here." No one moved. No one defended her. Eliza swallowed hard, willing herself not to cry. Then, the glass door opened with a quiet click. Footsteps echoed in the tense room. "Mr. Cartwright," a calm, low voice said. Everyone turned. Nathan stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room like a sudden storm. His sharp suit contrasted with the soft expression in his eyes that were fixed on Eliza. "Mr. Cole," Cartwright stammered, paling, We didn't expect you." Nathan's gaze swept across the office, then settled back on Cartwright. "I heard shouting from the hall." Cartwright straightened, forcing a smile. "Just a small issue, nothing to concern you." Nathan's voice dropped, quiet but cutting. "I'm very concerned when I see a team leader berating employees instead of guiding them." Cartwright opened his mouth, but Nathan raised a hand, silencing him. "You're firing the only person in this room brave enough to stand up for someone else," Nathan continued. "You've just lost your best asset." Murmurs spread through the room. "Effective immediately," Nathan said coldly. "I'm terminating our contract with your department. Respect is not optional in any workplace I'm associated with." Cartwright's face drained of color. Nathan turned to Eliza, his expression softening. "Miss Bennett, may I speak with you outside?" In the hallway, Eliza stood stiffly, her bag clutched to her chest. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Nathan replied. She met his gaze, her eyes glistening. "I've worked so hard to keep my head down, I didn't want to cause trouble." "You weren't causing trouble," Nathan said gently. "You were doing what was right. And that's exactly the kind of person I need." Eliza blinked. "What do you mean?" Nathan smiled faintly. "Come work for me. Officially. I've been looking for someone with integrity and courage. Someone like you." Eliza hesitated, her heart racing. I'm just someone who gave up an umbrella." Nathan's smile softened. "No. You're someone who never sits down when things go wrong. That's far rarer than you think." For the first time in days, Eliza felt the knot in her chest begin to loosen. The letter that opened a heart. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth as Eliza stepped into her apartment. She kicked off her shoes and sank onto the small sofa, the day's events replaying in her mind like a restless film. Daza. She had stood up for someone today. She had lost her job because of it, and yet she didn't regret it. Her eyes fell on the folded blazer resting on her armrest. As she reached for it, something small and white slipped from the pocket and landed softly on the floor. A letter. She stared at it for a moment, startled. Her name was written across the front in steady, precise handwriting. Eliza unfolded the page slowly. Eliza, you probably weren't expecting this. I wasn't expecting you either. Not that night in the rain, not in the cafe, and certainly not in that conference room. But you appeared, quietly, like someone meant to be there all along. I've built my life around certainty, around control. Yet the moment you handed me that umbrella, something shifted. You didn't know me, but you saw me. And somehow, without asking for anything in return, you reminded me what kindness feels like. You don't just give up a seat or an umbrella. You give people a place to rest when the world feels heavy. I've watched you do it over and over again. For Sophie, for strangers. Even for a terrified intern in a crowded office. Crest heavy. I don't know if I deserve a place in your world. But if there's a chance, I want to try. Crest heavy, hast heavy, hast heavy. You made my house feel like home again. Please, don't just be a guest. Nathan. Eliza's fingers trembled as she lowered the page. Her heart thudded in her chest. He had noticed. Every small thing she thought had gone unseen. He had been watching, not with judgment, but with quiet recognition. For a long time she sat still, staring at the letter. Her phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Are you okay? Did you get home safe? Eliza typed a quick reply, then set her phone down. She couldn't focus on anything except the words still echoing in her mind. You made my house feel like home again. Across town, Nathan sat in his study, staring at his phone. The unsent message on the screen glowed faintly. If I pushed too far, I'm sorry, but I've never been more certain about someone in my life. He didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back, clutching the soft scarf Eliza had left behind in his car earlier that day. It still smelled faintly of vanilla and rain. For the first time in years, he felt something stir. Not just hope, but fear. Fear that she might not feel the same. Fear that this fragile connection might shatter before it became something real. But deeper still was a quiet certainty. If Eliza walked back into his life, he wouldn't let her walk out again. No more hiding, no more fear. Eliza stared at the letter on her coffee table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The words seemed to glow faintly in the dim apartment light, as though they were alive, whispering promises and possibilities she wasn't sure she was ready to believe. Please, don't just be a guest. The words pulled at her heart, tugging her in two directions. She wanted to go to him, but what if she didn't belong in his world? Nathan Cole was steady, confident, a man who moved through boardrooms like he owned them. She was Eliza Bennett, a woman who patched her shoes with glue and kept her fridge half empty to pay hospital bills. What could she offer him besides a borrowed umbrella and a soft smile? Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from her mother. You've always been brave, Eliza. Don't let fear make you forget that. Eliza swallowed hard. Her mother had always known how to cut through her doubt. With trembling hands, she stood and pulled on her faded beige dress, smoothing the fabric nervously. The tall glass doors of Carter Industries gleamed under the evening lights. Eliza hesitated outside, clutching her bag tightly. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but her feet betrayed her, carrying her forward. As she stepped inside, the receptionist glanced up but didn't stop her. It was after hours. The lobby was nearly empty. She rode the elevator in silence, her reflection staring back at her in the polished doors. No more running, she whispered to herself. When the elevator doors slid open, Eliza's breath caught. There, down the hall, she saw Nathan. He was standing close to a stylish woman with chestnut hair and an effortless laugh. The two were sharing a quiet conversation, their faces warm and relaxed. Eliza froze. Her heart plummeted. Lose. Hux, of course. Why would he wait for me? Why would he choose me? Hux, he totes. Her chest tightened painfully. She turned sharply, her heels clicking too loudly against the marble floor as she fled back toward the elevator. Her shoulder brushed a small side table, sending a tray of coffee cups clattering to the floor. The sound echoed down the hall. Nathan's head snapped up instantly. His eyes locked on her retreating figure. "Eliza," he called, his voice sharper than she had ever heard. She didn't stop until she reached the lobby. Her hands were shaking as she wiped at her eyes, furious with herself. "I shouldn't have come," she muttered under her breath. "Eliza, wait." The voice made her freeze. She turned slowly to see Nathan standing a few feet away, his chest rising and falling as though he'd run the entire length of the building. "That woman," he said quickly, "she's my cousin. She flew in from London this week. We were catching up." Eliza blinked. "Your cousin?" Nathan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I wasn't expecting you. But God, I hoped you'd come." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've been waiting for you, Eliza." She shook her head, tears threatening again. "I thought I could walk into your world. But I saw her, and it reminded me, I don't belong there." Nathan's jaw tightened. "You stepped into our life the moment you gave up your umbrella on that rainy night. I've been trying to catch up with you ever since." Her lip trembled. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "You have everything. I'm just trying to survive." Nathan reached out, cupping her face gently. "You're everything, Eliza. Everything Sophie and I didn't know we needed." The world seemed to fall silent. Eliza closed her eyes as his thumb brushed away a stray tear. When she opened them again, she saw no hesitation in his gaze. Only warmth. Only certainty. "Hedberly, just a twan. No more running," she whispered. Nathan's lips curved into the faintest smile. No more hiding. And then, like the first crack of sunlight breaking through after a storm, they fell into each other's arms, quiet, real, and unshakable. A new family and the garden wedding. The little garden behind Nathan's house smelled faintly of lavender and fresh earth. Eliza stood barefoot on the stone path, watching as Sophie knelt in the grass, carefully arranging tiny wildflowers into a crooked circle. "This is for the fairies," Sophie declared solemnly. "They need a place to sit during the wedding, too." Eliza knelt beside her, smoothing Sophie's dress. "I think the fairies will love it." From the porch, Nathan watched them both, one hand resting on the wooden railing he had spent all weekend sanding and repainting. He still wasn't used to how much this place felt alive again. For so long the house had been silent, just walls and furniture, echoing with absence. Now, laughter spilled from the kitchen every morning. The scent of Eliza's blueberry scones lingered in the air. Sophie's drawings were taped haphazardly on the fridge, each one more colorful and chaotic than the last. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. The wedding was simple, low. There were no chandeliers, no violin quartets, no 7-tier cake. Just rows of wooden chairs in the garden draped with ivy and soft linen. Guests were a mix of neighbors, friends from the design firm, and a few of Nathan's colleagues, people who had watched him transform from a distant widower to a man alive with quiet joy. Eliza walked down the aisle in a flowing white dress that Claire had helped her choose. It wasn't designer or expensive, but Nathan thought she looked like sunlight breaking through clouds. Sophie clutched a small basket of petals, leading the way proudly in her yellow dress. As she scattered flowers, she whispered loudly, "You look like a princess, Mommy." Eliza's breath caught. She had never imagined she would hear those words. At the end of the aisle, Nathan waited. His suit was simple, navy blue, but his eyes, soft and steady, held a depth Eliza felt all the way to her soul. "I don't promise you a life without storms," Nathan said, his voice low and certain as they stood hand in hand under the flower arch Sophie had helped decorate. "But I promise you'll never face one alone again." Eliza smiled through her tears. "I may not come from your world," she whispered, "but I'll spend the rest of my life building ours together." The guests clapped softly as they kissed, the sound mingling with birdsong and Sophie's excited cheers. Later that evening, as lanterns flickered to life in the garden, Eliza sat at a long wooden table, watching Sophie smear chocolate icing on her nose. Nathan leaned over, gently wiping it away with a napkin. Family doesn't require blood, Nathan said quietly, glancing at Eliza. It just requires heart and the courage to stay. Eliza reached for his hand, her eyes glistening. Then let's stay. Always. Nathan nodded. Always. In the corner of the garden, a small keepsake table held a framed photo, the three of them laughing in the kitchen a week earlier. Beside it lay a pressed train ticket under glass, the umbrella Eliza had offered Nathan that rainy night now immortalized in memory. On the ticket were the words, "Love begins when someone gives you a seat and stays." 10. Love grows from small choices. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, dancing on the polished wooden counter. Eliza stood barefoot on the cool tiles, her hair loose around her shoulders as she poured 2 cups of coffee. The aroma mingled with the sweet scent of pancakes sizzling on the stove. From the backyard came the sound of hammering and childish laughter. She glanced out the window. Nathan was crouched by the fence, holding a crooked plank in place while Sophie knelt beside him, handing him nails one by one. "You're a natural, kiddo," Nathan said with a grin. "Think you're ready to build a treehouse next?" "Yes," Sophie beamed, smudges of dirt streaking her yellow sundress. Eliza smiled softly. This quiet rhythm of life was everything she had never dared to dream. A few hours later, the three of them sat together on the porch steps. Sophie curled in Eliza's lap as Nathan rested his arm around her shoulders. "I like it here," Sophie murmured sleepily, her head nestled against Eliza's chest. "It feels safe." Eliza kissed the top of her head. "It's safe because we built it together." Nathan reached over, brushing a stray lock of hair from Eliza's face. "You're the reason this house feels alive again." Eliza looked at him, her heart swelling. "I wasn't born into a family like this," she said softly, "but somehow we made one anyway." Nathan smiled. "Family isn't where you start, it's where you choose to stay." Sophie wriggled between them, wrapping her small arms around both their necks. "And I wouldn't trade mine for anything." On the living room wall hung 2 simple frames. One held a photograph of the three of them on their wedding day, Sophie holding Eliza's bouquet with a toothy grin. The other contained an old, pressed train ticket, the one from that rainy evening when Eliza had handed her umbrella to a stranger. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "The smallest kindness can change a life forever." As the sun dipped low behind the garden fence, laughter echoed through the little house, spilling into the evening air like a quiet hymn. They hadn't started as a family, but one small choice at a time, they had chosen each other. And that made all the difference. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.